Hello and welcome to Rotten Reviews, and today I'm tackling another patron request, this time coming from Jackie, who wanted me to watch and review the 2010 movie Beyond the Black Rainbow. This was the feature-length motion picture debut of writer-director Panos Cosmatos, who you might recognize from the more famous 2018 Nicolas Cage movie, Mandy. And this movie is largely centered around the Arboria Institute, a commune that was developed in the 1960s, and this movie takes place several decades after the fact in the 1980s, 1983 specifically, I believe. And it's kind of a shell of its former self. The reins of power have been handed over from the founder of Dr. Mercutio Arboria to the now administrator of Barry Nile. And at the moment, it seems like the only practical application this institute serves is the frequent daily interviewing of a young girl kept in seclusion there. I would get into more of the plot, but it's honestly really not the point of this movie. I often talk about the difference between style over substance and style in lieu of substance, and I would have to say that this movie walks a very fine line between the two for the entirety of its runtime. Everything is completely awash in vibrant neon colors. The entire movie is saturated and throbbing even with a synth soundtrack happening in the background. This is a movie that is all about the visuals and not quite so much the story. So why did Jackie request this movie for me? Well, according to her, while I appreciate and love the vibe of this film, I'm not sure the payoff is worth it. Would love to have a one-sided conversation with you about it and know your thoughts. Fair enough. So my thoughts, just very candidly, and putting them right out on the table, is there are several aspects of this movie that I do appreciate, but overall, I have to admit, it just wasn't for me. So just reading through some things after I finished watching the movie, I found that this apparently is quite a divisive film, and that seems to be about the least surprising thing I've ever heard. Some people love it, some people hate it, and probably the second least surprising thing that I could possibly know is that I wind up somewhere in the middle. Although I do tend to drift more towards films that put more focus on story than anything else, I do have to admit that there are movies that are heavily saturated visual spectacles that I do still love. And having odd abstract imagery is certainly not a deal breaker for me. There are aspects of it that I do appreciate. I mean, fairly recently I reviewed the 𝗘𝗾𝘂𝗶𝗽 movie Mad God, and that is a movie that was very, very light on story and massively heavy on visuals, but I adored it. But I do have to admit that for the particular style found in Beyond the Black Rainbow, it just really wasn't my cup of tea. I was really kind of waiting more for stuff to happen, anything at all, visual or story, I didn't care. This movie takes a very long time to do anything. And those long moments of neon pauses are not filled with silence, but rather filled with that synth throbbing soundtrack. And I just kind of found it to be, honestly, a little bit grating at first, and by the time the movie was reaching its last few moments, it just was, well, I was pretty happy when it was over, honestly. That's not to say that I hated this movie. I'm kind of really walking a bit of a tightrope here because, like I said, there are aspects of this that I do appreciate. This was beautiful. It was technically really interesting in some places. It just took a long while to get there with some very long beats in between. No scene in this movie ever felt snappy. And while I appreciate a film that has some, let's just say, purposeful pacing, at some point I do kind of want it to just get on with things. But one of the things that I do appreciate, I kind of had to really kind of think about for a while, and it really does kind of call to mind the odd abstract visual nature of some of the more challenging midnight films of our entire cinematic history. Myself, I'm a big fan of Eraserhead, and I would have to say that Beyond the Black Rainbow kind of, well, it brought up some thoughts of Eraserhead as I was watching it. And I'm not saying that this movie reached the level of artistic merit that the David Lynch film has, but it did draw to mind those challenging midnight movies, midnight theater showings, and the cult-like status that grows underneath the film's very own feet. And it kind of seems like we're having a bit of a lack of that these days. And so when I see a movie that does kind of bring those things to mind, those challenging visual aspects that really put some pressure on the audience to try and find the beauty within and not just focus on the oddities and the abstract nature of it. I have trouble seeing it as a negative thing. But at the same time, I also have to admit very freely and honestly that this was a movie that lulled me almost to sleep in places. There seems to be a bit of a trapping these days where if somebody walks away from a film or an art piece that doesn't personally resonate with them, that they can't find anything good about it. And I think that that's folly. I think that it's perfectly all right to say that, it didn't land, it didn't resonate, but you did find aspects of it that were beautiful, and that's the boat that I find myself in. A lot of the complaints that I had about the movie Mandy, I also have about this film, and I'm kind of coming to the place of saying that it might just be that the works of Panos Cosmatos is not for me. But if you are the kind of person that enjoys these neon-washed movies that do trickle into style in lieu of substance territory and also trickle into weird for the sake of weird territory, that's perfectly fine. And on that merit, I can't recommend this film enough. I think you should absolutely watch it if you haven't already. But for those of you that are looking more for a linear storyline that's character heavy as opposed to visually abstract, this may be one to stay away from. But regardless, I am grateful to Jackie for bringing this one to my attention, and I'm also grateful to you for watching this video. If you like this, please click like and subscribe. And remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.